Actually, we're talking about regulation. You would say, perfect. So, and the reason why I think it's important that we all are happy about this is the one question, if I ask Web3 founders, what do they need? Where do they need expertise and advice? They say, how do I build Web3 companies in a compliant way? So this is the opportunity for all of you who want to be Web3 entrepreneurs to basically learn and listen. And I think I have the easiest job of the day, because I don't think there has been any panel where so many experienced panelists are on. Thomas already said to me, oh, maybe see what that means. It can go really wrong as well if you have experienced people on there. But I would love to introduce you to Nina Siedler. Nina Siedler, you have been many years practicing law, and in the most recent years, I know you have basically focused as well on crypto and blockchain. And I don't know whether you remember, but it's January 2020, just pre-corona, when I sat in your office and at DBF, you were at EWF, you were at that time, and you actually explained to me and introduced me to DeFi. And you said, Mark, this thing, there's CeFi, and DeFi, did you understand? So thank you for that. You really basically opened my eyes on this. Then we have Patrick Hansen, who is, if I follow my crypto Twitter, you're one of those amazing interpreters of what's happening out there in Europe and in Berlin in politics and regulation. And I think we should be grateful that there's nearly nobody who can write that elegantly about a difficult topic and really make it accessible. And thank you for being such a source of inspiration as well. And then we have Peter Grosskopf. You have built some German lighthouses in the crypto space, and from the technical side, you have been Solaris and now 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, and now you're basically building the DeFi super app. It was Unstoppable Finance, and now it's Ultimate Money. No? So we basically have somebody here as well who is actually building a company in that, and we have Thomas Nägele, I think the second person who besides Nina who brings a lot of experience working with multiple companies and projects in the Web3 space from a legal and regulatory perspective. And the great thing is you bring the Liechtenstein perspective in there. So we basically are actually looking a little bit across the border. All right? So thank you very much for being on there. And let's kick it off maybe very pragmatically. So especially when, when you, Nina and Thomas, but I think, Patrick and Peter might have an opinion as well. When you basically are talking to entrepreneurs who want to start a Web3 project or business, what do you think is the typical mistake or the misperception they have about regulation and what's ahead of them?
Going global immediately. That doesn't work, unfortunately, not with law, at least, because, we've got the UN Convention. The world is splintered in roughly 200 jurisdictions. And what works compliantly here doesn't work a couple of 100 kilometers to the east or to the west or to the north or south anymore. So the idea of starting a tech project and immediately going global doesn't work. Right, so that's often still a surprise.
Not really borderless.
Not really borderless.
True. I mean, I think they do a lot of, mostly they do it right if they come to a lawyer in the first place, right? I think that the best thing you can do, it's good for lawyers because if you start your project without having legal advice, and if it's a successful project, you have the funds then to pay the lawyers to clean the mess. But it's actually better if you do that before, right? That you have a clear path. But I would actually agree that the biggest challenge is that for sure, I have a lot of understanding for that as an entrepreneur you want to start now, right? And that's actually the same here now. It's a regulation panel which is hindering us to go on the rooftop party and have some drinks. So regulation is always, in a lot of cases, actually hindering innovation and hindering entrepreneurs in providing their services and products.
Well, I think there's also a fundamental misunderstanding on what regulation actually is. because I think for many it's just like, oh, it's just these rules that you have to follow, but they don't really understand what's behind and what's the goals. So therefore, when I try to dig myself into the whole topic, so I have a technical background, so it's not my job description to read whatever 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 texts and DLT and all this kind of stuff, but I really try to understand what are the requirements behind it. And there's actually a great source, which is the website of BaFin. So there's a page with the goal of BaFin, and so where they're talking about like whatever market transparency and operational resilience and so on. It's actually it's maybe like 5-minute read, but really understanding, so where are they coming from, and then of course it translates into rules and into laws. And this translation is cumbersome sometimes also because it's connected like to technological solutions, and so this is then where the mess starts. And I think, for example, if you would have more like principle-based regulations, so kind of like deriving from the goals and then kind of like having different implementations for it, I think that would really help.
Fantastic. So, Patrick, if you basically, rewind back the last 2-3 years or so, like what was the most impactful, whatever piece of regulation or interpretation of regulation or even actions a regulator has taken, which is still impacting and shaking the Web3 world at the moment? So what, and take it maybe more from a European perspective, and let's not kind of open it to the whole world.
Yeah, I think the most impactful regulation is being finalized and rolled out right now. So I think it's the first time that we actually see with MiCA, the markets and crypto assets regulation, on a European scale. It's the first time that we actually see a comprehensive regulatory package for the entire crypto space, for all kinds of token issuances, but also service providers based on crypto assets, custodians, exchanges, etc. Also introducing market abuse rules, for example, so investor protection rules. And before that, we have seen like some punctual, regulatory policy action, sometimes enforcement action, with regards to taxes, with regards to token offerings in the ICO boom in 2018. We have seen singular pieces of regulation regulating certain services, like in Germany, the crypto custody business, in the beginning of 2020, but I think right now that's really the first time, and Europe is obviously, no surprise, the first major jurisdiction introducing that regulatory package, that we really see a comprehensive regulatory framework being built. And that will, to be honest, that will, I think, influence in large parts the success of the entire crypto industry in Europe for the next decade or so. So there are massive stakes, obviously, right now on the policy area, and that's why we are also active. That's why we're trying to, since years, because that MiCA package has been first introduced in September 2020. I remember that, and even before that, there were consultations and so on. And because the stakes are so high, that's why the community is still so engaged in the industry. And as we all know, the crucial key details are still not entirely clear. That's why we have to continuously be so alarmed about certain aspects. And examples of that are NFTs or stablecoins.
You said that I should bring Liechtenstein perspective here. So Patrick, let me add, there is a regulatory framework in place, which is very comprehensive, which is actually also covering the similar part for tokenization of assets, and that is the Liechtenstein example. I got the Fürstentum, of course. Sure. It's in force since 1st of January 2020, but I think, and I want to add there as well, it is already happening that the draft of the MiCA regulation we have available is used in other jurisdictions, because that is for the first time ever, and you said that, in a big market, in a 400 million plus market, a same level playing field, which is going to be applicable soon. So what is happening is that other regulators are looking at that very, very closely in other jurisdictions, because what they are aiming for is having, even if it's not equivalency, because you don't get that directly, right? But they want to have a same or a similar approach, because, Nina, you said it, in the end, we have jurisdiction by jurisdiction, right? It's a mosaic. And And the challenge is that we need a harmonized global approach, borderless, right? We should have one solution, and the entrepreneur should be able to provide the products and services globally. And regulation should not always be the bloody
Actually, I must object a bit. I always tend to say, law is already decentralized, right? And I personally think that is a good thing, right? I would be very scared if we would only have one law globally, because now we can choose, right? If we don't like the legal environment, we can move elsewhere. So I wouldn't, lobby for one law across the globe, but it could be a little less than 200 plus, right?
Yeah. And also adding to your both points, because you were both saying the crypto industry, I think also to understand the MiCA better, so we need to define that, right? It's because MiCA is a selection of rules that's applied to centralized companies. So it's in the end kind of also in Germany, so the 𝗗𝗶𝗶𝗍𝗂𝗏 with 𝗗𝗶𝗍𝗶𝗏 already, I think it was 2016 or 2015, already made the first statements regulating virtual currencies, and for that reason there was regulation for trading Bitcoin in Germany for a long while already. And kind of MiCA is now the extension for companies who are, let's say, bank-like, who do a custodial business, who do also exchange business, like Patrick explained, and all this kind of stuff. So therefore, so let's say 99% of what's included in MiCA is really in the direction of centralized companies that have a company registration inside the European Union. But I think also where Patrick is making great work, always discovering the new amendments popping up and so on, because there's still amendments being discussed and also with quite crucial redefinitions. So is now DeFi included or not, or is NFTs included or not? And so there's still back and forth. And I think so what has been super important, also being involved, pushing behind the scenes, is so that we try to keep DeFi out of MiCA as much as possible. Why that? So because we don't want regulation. Well, I wouldn't say yes to that, but because I believe that kind of MiCA is working somehow the way how regulation worked before, and kind of applying rules to roles in the market. So there's the marketplace, there's the custodian, there's the investment advisor, and so on, and there's certain rules applied to those roles. But these roles mostly don't exist in DeFi anymore. So there is no custodian anymore. So I do self-custodial business. So there is a decentralized marketplace. There's a liquidity provider, which is not a registered company. So these things work in a different way. And therefore, I personally also hope that, so there will be regulation for DeFi, yes, but it needs to really fit into the topology and the kind of the way how DeFi works, because otherwise we kill it.
But lovely. So, but maybe just to follow up.
Not just.
No, just one thing, because that is actually the thing that I wanted to say, right? I mean, it's a regulatory approach. It's crypto assets, and we're not talking about financial instruments which are tokenized, right? So it's the regulatory approach which we should have globally. Because if others say, okay, we're in our jurisdiction, we'll just have one law, the financial market law, and now everything is a financial instrument. If we are having a completely different approach, we will have big challenges. And I think what is actually crucial is, and you said that, if it is not regulated, it is not regulated. And I hope that this is a conscious decision not to regulate something. Because if, you're saying no, but for example, we did that.
Not, unfortunately. I completely agree with you. We know it is not.
But we did that. We made a conscious decision that this is an area where technology works to mitigate the same risks which we normally mitigate with regulating intermediaries, right? And I think that should be the approach. If it is not, if you're saying really, if you are 100% sure that was not the case, that's actually really bad news.
Well, we had a long discussion back and forth with the European Commission whether, DeFi DAOs and things like that are in or out, right? And it always comes down to the discussion, what is decentralization, right? So what requirements are needed? What requirements do you need to fulfill to being able to really honestly claim that nobody is providing that service of a DEX or whatever decentralized token service you create, right? And we never get answers to that. And I think, the fault is partly with us, with the community, because we always tried to hide away a bit with this topic. We're not really open and honest in a lot of cases. And I think, when we change that, we will get a chance to get certain things out and to really claim that certain structures are truly, honestly, only a digital infrastructure, which is run by multiple parties, but do not, provide a service, so to speak, anymore. And that's where we need to get down to.
But I was referring to this BaFin page with the goals, and so from my point of view, also like regulation, if you try to understand it, it's something, let's say, it's something human. Yeah, we are all humans, and it's also a little bit like system theory, really kind of understanding. So like what's happening, and I try to narrow myself, like when it comes to DeFi regulation and wrapping my head around it. Also kind of from the crucial question, not if something is decentralized or not, because in the end, form follows function. So I can make a GmbH or a GBR or whatever form for a company. So it just needs to fit kind of to what I want to do and how I do it. So therefore, I think like the organizational form we shouldn't care about that. But I think the thing we need to care about is like who's accountable and who's liable. Because I think that's in the end, the core question. Also, if we want to grow the space, 100x, like in terms of TVL and user base, so will people invest into a protocol, let's call it Luna, so where some people fuck it up, and so they fuck it up, and then they say, hey, well, it was your fault because you invested into this. Just like, okay, potentially, so this kind of services won't grow 100x like in TVL and user base, and therefore, I think if we think about the liability and accountability, so this could be a DAO, or this could be like a Wyoming DAO or Liechtenstein or whatever, maybe also like a civil law-based DAO or some form of structure. And I think we need to think in these ways, because in the end, it's humans consuming our products that we build. And if we don't find answers to those questions, so the space won't get the size that we all want.
So I think, like a good moderator rule is don't stifle a good debate which is coming up. So thank you for basically kind of, bringing a bit life to kind of that topic. Let's kind of, stick with Mika, but take maybe a more kind of, a step back in what did it actually achieve? And the question is maybe, Patrick, I'm asking myself, so Mika, that harmonized framework, which has holes or still some unclarities, I hear, and I've just learned that, is the benefit of the Mika regulation rather that it helps in the European Union, in those countries where regulation wasn't there or not clear enough to basically introduce some solid set, or was it rather a benefit that existing progressive, already clear regulation, but which were different? For example, Germany was on the forefront, that we harmonized and really did the job of creating harmony and harmonious framework there. So was it new markets we basically exported in the EU, or was it helping to bring us as a EU together?
Yeah, I think the goals of Mika were quite outspoken right from the start, and I think it's mainly three. And you mentioned two of them. So the first one is being regulatory harmonization. We had just a insanely complicated regulatory patchwork in the EU, and we still have right now, with I think 7 countries, Germany including, that have a proper license for crypto businesses. Austria is one of them, Estonia, France, and most of the other ones don't even have one. So you are not even able to apply for a specific crypto business license. So regulatory harmonization with a certain passporting regime. So if you get one regulatory license to operate as a brokerage firm, for example, you can passport that and offer your services throughout the EU. And I think that's the biggest goal and the most important one for the industry. The second one you also mentioned is just the creation of legal and regulatory certainty for all the businesses around Europe. And I think, depending on who you ask, Mika will definitely go a great deal in that direction. And then the third one is just the protection of investors and creating, market rules similar to the existing rules that we have in the financial markets with regards to securities, for example. And yeah, so these are the three rules, and obviously there are some details that still have to be figured out with regards to especially NFTs, DeFi, and then some key aspects with regards to stablecoins, where Mika might go a little bit too far and stifle innovation. Maybe would be an interesting topic to discuss, but those are the primary goals.
I think it's worth to mention that, like alongside you said, with Mika, there was a digital finance package, which was actually issued in September 2020. There was also published the DLT-MTF pilot regime, which is final, it's there, and that's another example where it was a good idea, but like you have some words which like kill most of the innovative part of it, right?
I'm actually looking forward to how many companies will apply for those exemptions. That will be interesting to see.
Yeah, because first of all, they all need to have already licenses in place, right? So none of the startups can apply for that.
The other question I'm asking is Europe ready for that? So I know it's supposed to happen in 2024. So I can imagine, are the regulators well staffed? Do they have the skill and competency? Do we really think all the local, or the national parliaments will pass the required local legislation? What is your view on that? And I already got a perspective from your laughing out.
So BaFin is really doing a good job. They are having really knowledgeable people there, which are deep into the tech. That's undoubtedly the case. Unfortunately, too little, right? So currently they are lagging behind all those filings for crypto deposit business and so forth. For inquiries, informal inquiries for clients, for which we waited typically, 2 to 3 months. We are now waiting like 8 to 9 months. So it got really, really difficult to communicate and to get actually answers back. And I think you will see that across Europe. In Germany, we have, the only good thing is that we already have all these license requirements in place. And everyone already holding a national license will get a fast track under Mika, right? So that's why we also see currently a lot of foreign service providers applying here in Germany, because then they will be quicker under Mika.
But is it really like all of the licenses you can get with Mika, you have them now locally? Did you like an analysis?
Most of them. Yes, because it's basically, what we know under MiFID.
Because I did a lot of work on that to check like our local framework and the registrations we have there and the ones in Mika. That's actually because that is really a USP for our jurisdiction, to be very honest.
Absolutely, and Mika, at least the draft that I'm aware of, states explicitly that you don't need to provide any information for the Mika license anymore, which you already provided to your national regulators beforehand. So that will really shorten down.
You still have to apply for the license, but there will be basically a very fast approval process of those companies that already have a license. I think those supervisors that may not be ready yet are actually the European ones. So the ESMA and the EBA, the regulators that up until now had really nothing to deal with any kind of crypto business or crypto service, and they will be actually key when it comes to the specifications of all those regulatory provisions. For example, so how the EU works is there's the entire legislation process, but then the crucial details when it comes to the operational provisions. For example, what does the reserve, how should the reserve of stablecoin providers, issuers look like? There's nothing in Mika that says that in detail. They only say high quality liquid assets, and it now comes to the second layer, legislative process with ESMA and EBA that have to specify what counts as a high quality liquid asset, for example. And there are dozens of those provisions. And actually, if you look at EBA and ESMA, I think there's where they have to do some aggressive hiring in the next couple of months and years. Because they currently lack that expertise, and it's not just me saying that, it's even the chairs of those supervisors admitting that. And I think we will see some funny constellations where Mika will enter into force after a transitional period, but we still don't have the specifications of the supervisors that still have to be drafted and negotiated in the second layer process. which might generate some funny outcomes where companies have to comply, but they don't have the specifications yet, so they comply on a best effort basis. I think that would be interesting to see.
Fantastic. So on the other metaverse panel, I asked what should I tell my 14-year-old son, which job to take. I learned recruiter for whatever public institution, legal, like people is maybe a good job for the next couple of years. So I think, I said we want to be finished by 8, but I understand if the audience would have questions, of course we can go beyond 8 o'clock and wait for the party to happen. So is there any pressing question you want to get answers to from that fantastic panel here?
Quick question, not sure if it's a quick answer, I hope so, but feels like you can't have a regulatory legal panel without asking about Tornado Cash. So what's your view? What will be the impact on Europe?
I mean, based on the information I have, and that's not really much, I think that is really crucial. But the fear we had in the beginning that now law enforcement is coming after coders because they just provide code is not proven to be completely right. I think there are some, at least they found something which is a little bit more substantial. So it's really doing it on purpose, or at least there is some piece of information which provides reasonable ground that something like this happened. It was not just write the code, right, and put it into the public domain. And the idea was to help us to keep our privacy, right? That was not the only idea about that. And so I closely follow that process, and I think that is really a very crucial case for the industry, because I believe in general you shouldn't actually regulate coders because you will hinder innovation.
Well, when I talk to our IT colleagues, they always say, obviously, yes, you do. You are liability for the code that you expose to the public, right? There's no question about it. And I think the problem sometimes lies with what is communicated about that piece of code, right? So it's similar to prospectuses for securities, right? If you don't explain the risk involved, but only make advertisements for some great code, then you end up in trouble.
But that was exactly what I was saying, right? I mean, if this is a criminal case, right, and he said use it to launder money, use it to hide your traces, right? That's a different story than if you say I coded something and the idea is to protect your privacy. That if you have a transaction from a Bitcoin wallet and you want just to protect your privacy, that's a different use case, right? And I mean, first of all, that's a jurisdiction where I'm not admitted at, right? I have no clue about that criminal law, but speaking in general, I think it's really crucial that should be, if this is the case, that's a completely different outcome, I think, than this person or one person says, use it for money laundering, right? Yeah. And I think the question is, yes, that is actually true, but the thing is really, again, where do you start and where do you end regulation?
Yeah. And also adding to the question, I had a chat with an investor from the US yesterday, and she was saying, okay, so many people in the US and also from the ecosystem over there also think that there is actually more behind this case than we all know, so that it's not only about like a tool that could be used by people to launder money or whatever, so that there is actually some details that we don't know. But well, I think that this will turn out. So the question was, can it happen in Europe? Well, I think Europe is a little bit less aggressive, at least from my perspective. So therefore, they would definitely not make such a statement like in public before really discussing and really seeing all perspectives of it. But still, I really believe that it's now already 15 minutes before high noon to also involve ourselves into the policy making, and because I think many, so you said it a little bit earlier, many DeFi projects really try to hide kind of with the DAO, and kind of also because the team is of course globally based and it's nowhere registered and tries to fly under the radar. But if you don't speak up, and make your opinion clear, then you also don't get hurt like from the elected politicians, and therefore so yeah, we really started like really to form a union and kind of like try to also speak to many people in the community, also hear their thoughts and try to find like a balanced position also on many things for potential future regulation for DeFi, because if we don't put thoughts into this, people who are actually less motivated to make it really good will do this, and I think the outcome we can all expect will be like it is. And also making another connection also to what I said earlier. I think that also many people who work in Web3, and this was also your initial question, like what is an advice for a Web3 founder? I think many people don't actually know how much kind of like accountability and liability they have. And like in civil law, there's like juridical persons, so like a GmbH, and so you have like limited liability, and that's actually invented with some rules about like kind of like how much you are involved like in taking decisions, simply to also protect you and your project. And I think if us four are doing a doing a DAO here, so we're a GBR and we're liable with our personal belongings, that's not so cool if we fuck it up. And therefore I think it's really has to become a conversation where we all together also think about like, okay, so how can we protect ourselves, and actually what things do we need to invent and what structures we need to build, and I think that's also part of this whole discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter, for that ask as well to involve us, because I think it's important. We can't leave basically the regulation, which should help us to be safer or coordinate in a better way, leave it to the back doors of only politicians. For everybody here, if you want to get involved, like and you don't know exactly how it goes, like look at those four people, speak with them over a glass of wine, a beer, a drink or so tonight, and as well there you have navigators who can basically walk you through how you can as well involve yourself and co-shape that regulatory environment we all will live in. So thank you very much for a fantastic panel. I think we did a high mark at the end, and lovely to have you on board.